talking about muktzah. And for those of you who have the book, that's great. You can turn to page 44. Those of you who don't have the book, you should get the book and fill all your spare time with reading it. Okay, so we were talking about that there's the concept of muktzah. We're going to talk about the different categories of muktzah, but right now we were just talking about the various ways that you can confront muktzah on Shabbat and interact with it. So we talked about that if you need to, given certain conditions, if you need to move something that's muktzah, there's two different types of permissible ways of moving it. We talked about moving it in an awkward manner, which is when you do something differently than you normally do, and that's called tiltul kalachar yad, in an awkward manner. And then there's tiltul min hatzad, when you're handling it but indirectly. It's not a shinoi, but you're not necessarily, it's not proper contact. And we were discussing those things. So we're on page 44, and we will talk now about tiltul kalachar yad, which means handling muktzah in an awkward manner. What does it mean in an awkward manner? Okay. So kalachar yad refers to any awkward or abnormal mode of handling or moving an item. Literally, it means backhanded movement, backhanded carrying. Okay, but it doesn't mean literal. I mean, that's what it literally means. Okay, this exemption also includes the moving of muktzah with any part of one's body other than his hands. Okay, meaning any way to move something, if you need to move something that you can't normally handle on Shabbat, under certain conditions, you may move it as long as you're not moving it with your hands. Moving it with your hands would be tiltul begufo, with his body, meaning that's the way that you would move something. You can't use your hands. But if you want to use your elbow or your knee or your foot, that is what we call kalachar yad, backhanded, meaning not use of the hand, using your body. Meaning using your hands, we call that moving with your body, right? And moving with parts of your body, we call it backhanded. Just to confuse you, okay? So, once again, tiltul kalachar yad, backhanded, means using any part of your body in an awkward way to move it, which is not your hands, okay? According to most poskim, moving a muktzah item in a backhanded fashion is permitted for any purposes, even if done for the benefit of the muktzah item.
Does not your hand include your arm, or is that the hand?
We will see. But right now, let's pretend that it means that you can't use your hand, but you could use your elbow, okay? So now, according to most poskim, even though something is muktzah and you would not be able to handle it, if you need to move it for any reason that you want to move it, even for the benefit of that muktzah item itself, you can move it in a manner that is not with your hands. Okay? You can pretend that it's a hacky sack or a beanbag. Okay? So moving an item with the back of one's hand is not equivalent to moving it in a backhanded manner. It is therefore not considered tiltul begufo according to some poskim and should not be done. Following below are examples of this form of permissible tiltul. So it's not enough not to move it in a regular way, but you can't use your hands at all, like we said, even backhanded, right? You can't brush something. Okay, so with one's body, one may sit upon a log, even if the log will shake slightly as a result. Although in this case, it is truly preferable to avoid causing the log to shake or move at all. But if you're moving it, right, if it goes up from the ground, down from the ground for a second, when you sit down, it's okay. Because you didn't actually lift it. You would not be allowed to go to a field and pick up a log. You can't do that, okay? With one's teeth. One may remove a wallet from the Shabbos table and bring it to a safe place by grasping it between his teeth. But if you're going to grasp between your teeth, you might as well ask Fido to do it instead. With one's foot, one may use his foot to shove a can of paint along the floor to remove it from the room. One may move coins that have been left on the floor with his foot to prevent them from being found by small children. With one's elbow, a rock placed on a heavy couch or on the Shabbos table by a child may be knocked off with one's elbow. One may close the door of a muktzah appliance, like a dryer, with his knee or elbow. That's provided that the dryer is turned off, of course. Okay? What about one's breath? What if you were a Kryptonian and you had, under a red sun, you were born under a red sun, now you're in Earth's atmosphere, and with your lungs, you can blow things at incredible velocity. One may blow at a muktzah item that is light enough to be moved in this manner, like paper money, mail, or stationery. In all of the aforementioned examples, the method used for moving the muktzah item is not the normal way of handling or moving it, and is therefore permitted for any purpose. Remember, muktzah is a derabanan. There's two approaches to the meaning of the Rabbanan. Either they preclude you from touching it because they want to preserve the sanctity of the Sabbath, or they're concerned that your engagement with it will cause you to do something that is forbidden. Therefore, they allowed you to interact with it in a way that there is no way in that permissible way of interaction that you'll get into that problem. Okay? However, it is important to note, I'm sorry, I don't know if I read this. In all the aforementioned examples, the method used for moving the muktzah item is not the normal way of handling or moving it, and is therefore permitted for any purpose. However, it is important to note that some poskim dispute the categorical exemption of tiltal begufo, meaning most poskim, everything we discussed goes according to most poskim. There are outliers that insist that even this is not permissible, that you can't just waltz over to a muktzah item and use your elbow or your knee to brush it off. Those are, So now, when it comes to halacha in general, you should know, rule of thumb is, when you have most poskim that say something, that is totally legitimate, and you could live that way. And you should not be thrown off by people that you will meet that adhere to the minority stricter opinions, and that's perfectly okay for them. And you may decide that in your life, for whatever personal considerations, it's worthwhile for you too. So it's always important to know that what most poskim hold, and that's really all you have to be concerned with to fulfill the halacha. And then, when it comes to outliers, it may be relevant to you, it may not be, okay? But you should know that when it comes to this category of tiltal begufo, if you're a posik, you definitely have to know that not all the poskim agree that this is acceptable, okay? And they say that moving a muktzah item with one's body is halachically no different from the ordinary handling of the muktzah item, and is therefore forbidden. It is therefore proper to refrain from moving muktzah items in this manner unless there is a pressing need. So what he's advocating is, since there are poskim that say don't do it, generally you should avoid it at all times, and if there is a pressing need, you may rely on most poskim. That is the approach of this book generally, okay? You should know that even the poskim that say that you cannot do this, they say you can move it in the other way that we're going to talk about, okay? The different we're going to now talk about, it's going to be a little technical, there's some jargon here. There are 3 categories of muktzah. When we say that something is muktzah, that is forbidden to be handled or come in contact with from the rabbis, this is possibly for 3 categorical reasons. While there is a multitude of muktzah items and objects, they are not all subject to identical restrictions. It can be stated that there are primarily 3 different categories of muktzah objects. There is something called muktzah machmat gufo. It is muktzah because of its body. There is something called muktzah machmat chisaron kis. There is something that is muktzah because it could possibly cause, it's very expensive or fragile, and it could, by handling it, you can incur damage and loss. And then there's the third example, which is muktzah machmat isur. It is muktzah because it is used for something forbidden. We're going to describe what all these things are. Okay, so the first thing is machmat gufo, something that is muktzah because of its body. Its body renders it muktzah. What does that mean? This includes any object or substance that has no intrinsic function and is not a designated utensil, vessel, or tool, like a material. Such objects are naturally set apart because they have no designated use. For example, debris, rocks, stones, bricks, gravel, pebbles, sand, twigs, grass clippings, soil, loose screws, bolts, bricks, money, trash, fruit peels, shells, pits. All these things, a human being doesn't have any use for them. If you come in contact with them, it's either to move them or to get rid of them or to use them for something, but they in and of themselves are useless. Detached windows, doors, lumber, construction materials, inedible foods like raw potatoes or frozen meat, rice, beans, peas, pasta, flour. None of these things you can do anything meaningful with them on Shabbat. And therefore, they're automatically off limits because of their very nature, okay? Unless you wanted to use a piece of frozen meat to put on a bruise. And in that case, it would be okay because that's the category of machmat gufo, as we'll discuss in a second. Okay, animals, insects, a corpse, broken appliances, utensils, dishes, glass, and other items that are no longer functional. Note, shards of broken glass, china, or any other hazardous materials may be swept away and removed. However, once safely discarded, they may not be handled. Okay, so that's Mahmad Gufo. We're going to call that muksa by definition. Why? Because it's substance that has no intrinsic function. Okay? Okay, the second category is Mahmat Chisaron Kis, due to its fragility or great value. Okay. So there are certain things that are rendered muksa that you cannot handle because they have great value, and these things are not meant to be handled regularly. So on Shabbat, you wouldn't be able to handle them. The halacha guidelines of this class of muksa are not limited strictly to its literal definition and shall be explained. This category of muksa includes items and utensils that one would generally not handle at any time because of their fragility or great value. Items that because they are fragile or valuable would not be used for anything other than their specific non-permissible uses and are not left lying around between uses. We're going to bring examples for all these things. All such items are subsequently not considered mukhan. They're not prepared. They are not available for use on Shabbat, for general use, and are muksa. Non-permitted uses in this context means uses that are not permitted on Shabbos. Meaning, a hammer, by definition, is meant to be used for building or constructing something which is a forbidden act on Shabbat. Therefore, the hammer itself, it's defined by its use, and therefore it would be muksa. Okay, items not ordinarily handled at all are like expensive ceramics or delicate china pieces that are only used for display, or delicate family photographs, or items set aside to be given away as gifts. Also, non-food merchandise such as new clothing, linens, glassware, or newly printed invitations, galley proofs, anything that you would not want handled generally. Examples of number 2 are items handled only for their designed, non-permissible on Shabbat uses, are like a shochet's knife. A shochet's knife is a very particular, specialized piece of equipment. It's also very fragile, right? It can't have any nicks or scratches on it to be rendered useful, and you cannot slaughter on Shabbat. So automatically, it's muksa because its use is for something that is forbidden on Shabbat, and to handle it by itself is generally, we don't encourage that anyway, so therefore it would be muksa. A mole's knife and instruments. So a mole's knife may be used on Shabbat, but since it is fragile and valuable, and it's not generally used for anything other than its specific purpose, you can't handle it on Shabbos. Delicate cutting or measuring instruments, surgical instruments, fragile carpentry or other trade tools, fragile appliances, implements, or accessories that one would not handle for any reason other than their designated use, like stereo equipment, records, an expensive camera, computer hardware, software disks, and the like. Anything that is meant to be used in a way that's forbidden on Shabbat and is fragile or expensive. It is important to understand that the concept of muksa, machmach chisaron kis, is not limited to items of extreme value. Any item that is easily ruined that one would refrain from handling for any reason other than its designated use, which is not permissible on Shabbos, is muksa under this category. Okay, do we get that? We understand this? A hammer is not machmach chisaron kis, it's machmas gufo. Or maybe it's the third category. Actually, I believe it's not machmas gufo because it's a vessel. Machmas gufo, we said, is debris or material that serves no purpose. Chesaron kis is if it's fragile and only used for a specific thing. The last category is going to be isur, which is a hammer, because a hammer is generally used to build stuff and you can't use it, but it's not fragile, and people use hammers for everything, and therefore we will see that a hammer is something you could use on Shabbos for a purpose other than construction. For example, to crack open a walnut. Okay? This is going to be the last category. We'll do that, and then I think we'll call it a day. Actually, we're not. I don't know if we're there yet. Okay, so let's see. Okay, an example of this last category, which is something that's not expensive. It's not necessarily expensive, but we don't handle it for anything other than what it's used for, would be stationery or any blank writing paper, birth certificates, licenses, registration papers, passports, or any other important documents, even if they retain little or no face value, inexpensive merchandise, or returnable items. Not all fragile or expensive items are muksa under this category. Only those whose delicate design or fragility preclude them from any practical Shabbos use and are muksa. Items whose designated use is permissible do not become muksa, even though they're fragile and will not be used for anything other than their designated purpose. Any such items are always prepared. They're considered mukhan and may be used on Shabbat when needed, like expensive chinaware, delicate crystal and glassware, a valuable watch, or very expensive apparel that one wears only on rare occasions may all be used or worn on Shabbat and Yom Tov because they are items of permissible use. Okay? This brings us to the hammer. Muksa mahmat isur. Muksa due to a prohibition. This is a category of muksa under which an object is muksa because of a prohibition appertaining to its nature or use. It is thus divided into two subcategories. You have isur atzmo, an intrinsic prohibition, and melachto leisur. It's an object or a vessel, a tool that is used, primarily used for an act which is asar on Shabbos. Okay, prohibited use. So isur atzmo, it's muksa due to an intrinsic prohibition, refer to items that are prohibited for their designated use and are basically useless for any other purpose. Meaning, a hammer I could use for other things. An ice pick, I can't. Or those handling, or whose handling could bring to a Shabbos transgression, are muksa under this category. Like, I guess maybe something like an electric calculator. I don't know, let's see. These items are set apart by virtue of the fact that they effectively have no practical use. They are sent because you can't use them for something other than what's asur on Shabbos. Therefore, they're muksa. There are essentially two types of items included in this category. There are items forbidden for their designated use, and there are items that may lead to a transgression. Meaning, the electric toy, right? I can't handle it because if I might activate it. Okay? Items forbidden for their designated use. Items that are forbidden to be used due to a transgression that was performed on them are muksa and may not be handled on Shabbos. For example, it is forbidden to catch fish on Shabbos because fishing is the malacha of trapping. A fish that was caught on Shabbos is forbidden to eat on Shabbos derabanan because we don't allow you to benefit from Hilchot Shabbat, and therefore, if one did fish on Shabbos or a fish that was fished on Shabbos is now muksa. Okay? Juices extracted or that seep of their own accord from grapes on Shabbos, you can't use on Shabbos. Fruits picked on Shabbos, wine that was touched or moved in an uncapped open container by a non-Jew or non-observant Jew may not be used on Shabbos. These items are forbidden to be eaten or drunk by rabbinic ordinances, and therefore, since you can't use them now, you can't benefit from them, so they're set aside and they're muksa. A garment made of shatnez material. If you have a wool and linen garment that you can't wear, so certainly you can't use it on Shabbos, because you can't use it. It's asur. Food comprised of meat and dairy combinations, or non-kosher foods. They're muksa because they're forbidden to you. Okay? One last little line here. The other example of these things that are muksa mahmat isur atzmo, right? Due to a prohibition, items whose use could lead one to do a malacha or other Shabbos transgression are muksa, may not be handled, like wet laundry. Can't handle, if you came into Shabbat and you have laundry that was not dried, you may not handle it all of Shabbos. Handling the laundry could lead one to wring out the moisture, which is forbidden because of schita. There's a malacha of wringing out, right? And you can't wring it out because a person will want to wear it, but it's too wet to wear on Shabbos, and you may do something to make it drier, and therefore it is off limits on Shabbos. Okay? This leaves us, I think we're going to end here? Yeah, okay, this leaves us with one last, we still didn't get to the hammer, that's our last one, and hopefully next week we'll pick it up. Baruch Hashem li'olam, amen b'yam.